Hey YouTube, welcome back. I've got a build here for you. This is a pretty standard looking physical damage crit Drelkor's Multishot character. Shooting 17 arrows, flying through monoliths feels really good. The single target damage of this particular build feels a little bit mediocre, but I think there's a lot of fun things we get to talk about today as we breeze through 500 corruption playing a very fast monolith farmer here. So if you're looking for something that shoots 17 arrows, that has a lot of fun gameplay along with it, that has both excellent defenses and offenses, and maybe isn't the best single target damage, but it's very reasonable up into including all the tier 4 bosses and 500 corruption, this is a great choice. So there's a list of things that we're going to talk about here at the very beginning of this video, and then in a couple minutes you will also see the rundown of all the blessings, the gear, the mastery, and the skills themselves. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and fast forward. But the first couple things we want to talk about here are the choices that we've made with this particular character that kind of set it apart from other builds you might see with Multishot. So I think the most important thing here is that we're in patch 0.9, and in patch 0.9, crit builds got a little bit of extra love. So we have a new affix that's available. It is a hybrid affix that has base flat critical strike chance. So this applies to both your bow attacks and also throwing attacks and spells in case you're playing some kind of bow mage character with the Rain of Winter. And then it's a hybrid affix, and it also has bow attack speed. So this is a great thing, and it's so strong. I think that if you have a 1 LP bow of any kind of unique item, then you'd really interested in just getting like a tier 5, tier 6, maybe even a tier 7 of this particular affix, because it's a very, very strong affix. Goes a long way in kind of patching up what crit builds kind of lacked in patch 0.9, because remember in patch 0.9, crit vulnerability no longer gives you infinite crit, it only gives you 20 crit. So this affix is a great boon, and it's kind of why we're playing the character. We want to play some kind of bow character to explore what this affix really feels like. So along with that, we have the pretty normal looking helmet at this point, Peak of the Mountain. Peak of the Mountain gives us a tremendous amount of % increased critical strike chance. In patch 0.9, I don't think this was a particularly exciting helmet, because all that % increase crit really goes best when you have a bunch of flat crit. And the bow skills just don't have flat crit available to them. So getting that flat crit somewhere, like a Prismatic Gaze, was what you previously wanted. But suffice it to say, the new affix that bows have access to now is excellent. I'm going to link to another build guide out there. This is from Volca. Volca put out a build guide in 0.9 talking about a multi-shot build using Flight of the First. And the biggest appeal of Flight of the First is not only is it on a good base, with a Dreadthorn bow that has that 4 critical strike chance on it, but it also has 5 additional bow critical strike chance on top of that. So this gives you 9 flat on top of the 5 flat that all of your skills have by default, or most skills have by default. Puts you at 14 critical strike chance, which is a great place to be in terms of scaling increased critical strike chance, which Marksman certainly has lots of access to. So we'll link that build, but Flight of the First, it has lower flat physical damage on it. It only has 48 instead of our particular bow, which has 104. Flight of the First has some crit multi on it, which is great. Drelkor's does not have any critical strike multiplier on it. Flight of the First only has +2 arrows for your multi-shot, and Drelkor's has +4 arrows. And perhaps even more importantly, it has this -4 bow attack mana cost. And multi-shot got changed in patch 0.9, where it had a lower mana cost now than it's ever had in the past. But even then, lowering the mana cost as much as possible is a great way of allowing you to scale attack speed, having a smoother playstyle for this particular version of Multishot, where we're just self-casting Multishot. We're not proccing it off a barrage in any scenario. We're just shooting, and it feels very good to kite around like that. So that's kind of the discussion of the bow itself. I think next up, I want to talk a little bit about Apostacy. So Apostasy, if you pop up in the Blade Dancer skill tree, it's this thing that says your dodge chance is added as twice as much chance to receive a glancing blow, but you cannot dodge. So Apostasy is a nice way of capping your glancing blows with fairly minimal investment in case you don't want to do anything else. So you can always spec out of Apostasy because you can gear better, you can get Dust Shrouds in different ways, you could use things like Dark Quiver, or even things like chance to get a Dust Shroud when you receive a hit. So those are great ways of getting extra glancing blow chance, especially along with probably the best quiver in the game, Arrow Guard, giving you a bunch of flat glancing blow chance as well. So in this particular build, we are not taking Apostasy because 2 layers of defense are better than 1 layer of defense. So I'm going to pull up some numbers here on screen real quick, just so you can see as well, because I know we put out a video recently talking about effective HP, and I would be remiss not to talk about effective HP here with you. So this is a character with about 600 dodge rating. This is my normal dodge rating when I'm walking around and I have my dust shrouds up. So like, you know, normal in combat stuff. And you can see our numbers are pretty low. This is 14, about 5 and 12. So we're definitely kiting. We're relying on a lot of life regen and whatnot. So yeah, no ward, area level 100, all these normal looking numbers over here. And this also assumes that we're moving as well. So the most important thing about this is that when we shift, let's pull open this thing again. When we shift, we have a shift spec to give us a bunch of flat dodge rating per dexterity. And we have a meager 24 dexterity here. But even then, it boosts up to, I guess we should have our dust shrouds up too. It boosts up to about 3,000 dodge rating here. So you'll see that our effective HP is at about 15 here. And then once we plug this in, boop, you'll see that we jump up for about 34,000 effective HP. So that 34,000 effective HP is for 1 second every 3.5 seconds. And then if we're building cooldown recovery speed, which you really ought to be building cooldown recovery speed, then you could have that maybe once every 2.5 seconds. First the iframe off of shift, and then the extra dodge rating feeding into your effective HP. So why do I talk about this? Because I really don't like Apostacy. And I always feel like having 2 layers of defense is better than 1 layer of defense. And the ability to dodge incoming projectiles, especially when there's like a stream of projectiles coming at your character, is a great way to avoid being stunned as well. And if you've ever played any high-end content in Last Epoch, you know that being stunned is one of the most dangerous things there is. So it's not always with the incoming damage. It's like, can I just not be stunned for a moment so that I can make use of my silver shrouds, my smoke bomb, my shift, my maneuverability, and get out of the way so I can reposition and put myself in a better spot. So I don't like Apostasy as a default. I like to avoid taking this whenever I can. And then having a bunch of dust shrouds. If you wanted to be even tankier than my particular character here, you would even put 8 points into health gain on glancing blow. And that's a really good way of mitigating even more of the incoming damage, especially from small hits. So capping your glancing blows is pretty much the only thing that Marksman has going for it in terms of defense. You have silver shrouds, you have range, you have maneuverability, but going out of your way in order to use things like Dark Quiver and to use affixes like gain a dust shroud when you receive a hit on your chest piece, that's the kind of thing that you would like to do in order to be nice and tanky. So, let's go start to talk about some of the gear itself. I guess let's go skills, gear, and then we'll talk about the fluff stuff after that. So for the skills, this is a pretty normal looking multi-shot character in my opinion. This is a self-cast multi-shot character. So the defining nodes that you'll need to know about here is that we are using Giant Slayer over on the far right side. We have the full 17 arrows. So we are, if we're point blank against an enemy, point blank, it's noted on the far left side. If we're point blank standing on top of a boss, we are very often one-shotting it in case it's any kind of monolith like Echo boss. And then for most bosses, you just want to be as close to them as possible. Maybe kiting around a little bit, maybe put down a smoke bomb as well. But that's the kind of damage that you'd like to deal with this node, shotgunning with all of your 17 projectiles. On the bottom, you're going to see some very normal stuff. The repeater bow, this is like as you're self-attacking, you will need to take, 3 attacks in order to shoot 2 times. And then all 3 points into this. The reason that I call this out is like you could try to skimp out on piercing shots. I really wouldn't recommend it. It kind of feels clunky if you try to trim these nodes out. You'd really like to have all 3 points into here. If you only have 20 levels in multi-shot, I would recommend trimming 1 point in sniping here, and then maybe trimming 1 point over here in point blank. If you'd like to trim all of point blank and just load your nodes into sniping instead, that's another option. But I wanted to gear for as much single target as possible because I felt like single target was kind of where I was lacking in particular. So next up, we have like 3 skills that are very normal looking. Shift, we have procced shurikens here. We have a bunch of movement speed, some cooldown recovery speed, and then these 4 points into elusive to give us all of our dexterity, which we already talked about. In smoke bomb, we have 1 point down here for our silver shroud. The only reason we have 2 points in silver shroud is so that we can also get cleansing ailments, because I think this is a nice little 1 point over here to have. If you don't want to go 1-2 to grab Cleansing Steam, you'd put 2 more points into Shadow Hunter over here for some extra base critical strike chance. My critical strike chance right now on the character sheet is 46, which is about 50, and then crit vulnerability puts that to about 70. So we're running around with about 70% critical strike chance normally. As soon as we put down our smoke bomb, we're capped bow critical strike chance. So we're at 70, I guess we're 73, but then plus 20 for the crit vulnerability change is about 93, and that feels excellent. So I don't feel like I need any more critical strike chance that I have right now. If I could change the throwing damage on my gloves for crit chance, I would do that. Dexterity is another good option. So that's our smoke bomb there. Then we have all the Dust Shroud frequency and the base crit from bows over here as well. For shurikens, super normal setup, getting all the percent increased armor, a bunch of duration, piercing, and a tiny bit of physical damage shred over here. And then for Dark Quiver is kind of a dark horse because not many people like it. I feel as though people don't like Dark Quiver because they assume that you have to actually click the button and then move around to pick up the Dark Quivers. The thing that I really like doing with Dark Quiver the most is grabbing this node over here called Until Dawn. It says using a bow attack has a chance to summon a black arrow around you and has a cooldown. So as you're shooting things, you'll see that every once in a while, black arrow, dark arrow, black arrow, Dark Quiver. A black arrow will spawn next to my character, and I can always path over this in order to give myself a whole bunch of glancing blow chance. So just by picking that up, we go from 72 to 97, and then with just one more Dust Shroud from receiving a hit because of our node here, or ideally because of our body armor as well, or just from having an extra smoke bomb to give some extra Dust Shrouds, we cap ourselves very, very easily with that Dark Quiver. Dark Quiver also gives us a little bit of health, gives us Frenzy for 3 seconds, some extra attack speed, and it gives us a Crimson Shroud, which is a little bit of less damage taken over here. So a lot of good things. I really like using Dark Quiver. If you weren't doing this, my recommendation would be to spec into Decoy instead. But for me, using a spec decoy versus an unspec decoy is pretty much the same. So across my bar on the bottom here, you'll see that I'm actually not even using decoy, and I have an unspec puncture. And that's because even with 19 mana regeneration, I still feel as though I need this point here, this 2 points in sapping strikes in my mastery, and an unspec puncture so that if I run low on mana during a 17 wave arena, which happens every once in a while if you're very unlucky like I am, or during a long boss fight where you stacked up a bunch of defensive modifiers, you would like to have something to generate mana just a little bit faster than your mana regeneration allows you to. So having more mana regen, like 22 or 23 mana regen would be ideal, but I don't have that right now, so I'm using unspec puncture instead of an unspec decoy. So those are our 5 skills. Let's talk about our mastery next. The base rogue class is probably the best base class in the game. There's lots and lots of good stuff here available to you. So we have all of the bow attack speed and plus 8 physical damage. I picked these nodes up around level 90 or so. So just a bunch of dexterity and health. It's percent increased damage. It gives you some flat dodge. It's nice to have. And then we have some poison res. The 5 points in less damage taken while moving. I would call these mandatory points. And then a couple points in haste just so that we can move nice and fast. We have points in dodge and parry in order to get some glance of blows. And then the sapping strikes here. If I had extra points, or if I were flexing things around, I would want to put points into Thief Guard as well. If I had better mana regeneration, I would consider dropping these 2 points altogether. In the Blade Dancer skill tree, we have all of our points defensively here. So extra glancing blows, extra health, and then chance to gain a Dust Shroud when hit. Once we get to gear, I'll continue mentioning that I want a body armor that has both chance to gain a Dust Shroud when you receive a hit and damage with multi-shot per arrow. What's the affix called? Increased damage per arrow with multi-shot. Those are the 2 prefixes that I would like to have on a body armor so that you're gaining those Dust Shrouds as consistently as possible. But for right now, this is what we're working with. In Marksman, we have one cute thing to talk about. We have 1 point in elemental arrows and then 3 points in siege quiver, 1 point in fire and steel. What this means is we have a bunch of percent increased elemental resistance. It's still kind of hard to gear on a marksman character, and it's nice to only be using physical skills, not be using any skills that have an elemental tag, so that we always have some bonus elemental resistance from carrying around these elemental arrows here. So we have 6 LE arrows at all times just by speccing our 3, 4, 5 points. And then 6 times 3 is 18. So these points are giving us 18 elemental resistance. Very cute. I like it. Next couple points here. We have 1 point into attack speed, 1 point into Silver Shroud. Worth mentioning, if you have Apostasy, Silver Shroud does work. It does allow you to dodge, even though you have, you cannot dodge on the Apostasy here. It's just worded weirdly. It does still work. Don't worry. The most suspect thing that we have here is the 6 points into Sniper's Gambit, because we are going to stand very close to an enemy, and we want to shotgun them with our 17 arrows, but we still have 30 flat physical damage here. So there's a ton of damage. I think it's worthwhile. 12% increased damage taken. Yeah, you'd still like to have this. You got to play around it, but even at 500 corruption, the character still feels good. I think this absolutely merits its spot here. Some flexible points down here. I found myself very much so enjoying this, but you could opt out of this if you'd like to. But we have some percent increased bow damage. Bow damage is not particularly helpful to us because we scale so well with damage per arrow with Multishot, the affix that is on 2 of our idols, and then our helmet, and it should be on our body armor. So we don't really benefit that much from the percent increased damage that you see here, but we stun so well. We have so much stun chance, and it feels so good. Even at 500 corruption, it should be stunning enemies, stunning monsters, stunning diamond matrons. I really like this node. And then, of course, it covers all of your armor shred chance requirements as well. So S tier node. I like this a lot. We have a high mana cost skill with Multishot. It costs 11 mana. So that times 500% is how much damage we're getting out of this. I try not to do math on stream. How much damage is that per point? I think it's 10% increased damage per point. Correct me. Please correct me. I think it's about 10% increase. I think it's a little bit more than 10% increased damage per point. But it also gives us lots of mana regeneration, which, of course, is what we're in the market for. This is S tier for us. So we have +4 arrows. Again, 17 arrows. We're shotgunning with all of them. It's the kind of thing we're into. And then, of course, we have 1 point in Barrage of Pain and all 5 points into health gain on crit. Speaking of gear and health gain on crit, all of our sustain comes from health gain on crit and health gain on skill use because we're using a Peak of the Mountain. Marksman has so much access to health gain on crit and health gain on skill use that we really don't mind the downside of the Peak of the Mountain helmet here. If you only have a 2 LP, you'd like to have double prefixes. If you're looking at my health total with 2600, we put on a helmet that has percent increased health instead. We go from 2600 to 30,000. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. I'd like to have percent health and then one of these prefixes, either damage per arrow or plus levels to Multishot. Either of those is exactly what you're looking for, hopefully with health as well. For our body armor, I alluded to this previously, but the 2 best prefixes for us, first of all, is damage per arrow with Multishot. Much better. It's like 350% increased damage instead of 80, which is what we have here, right? And you'd like to have a chance to gain a Dust Shroud when hit. I know it sounds like a strange thing to not have Vitality. You could seal Vitality if you'd like to, but having the chance to get a Dust Shroud when hit, along with the nodes from this, which is a 32% chance, it just makes it so much more likely that you're going to be capped glancing blows with more consistency. And remember, Dust Shrouds even have the 50 flat dodge rating, so it's going to feel even better that you're not playing an Apostasy character, and then you have Dust Shrouds to give you more flat dodge, to give you more of that effective HP you're looking for. For our amulet, there was an amulet that I really tried to farm before we made this YouTube video, but I couldn't end up farming it. There's a new amulet in the game. It is on a bone amulet base, which makes it automatically good, and it's called Apostate's Sanctuary, and it has up to 480 flat life on it. So instead of 50, 480 flat life. I think it's basically best in slot for rogue builds and for marksman builds, especially if you can get it with like any kind of LP with crit multi or whatever percent increased damage type you're dealing if you're playing a damage over time character. But the downside doesn't exist because you have no spells when you're playing on rogue character. Even Falconer will have no spells when Falconer is one day introduced in 1.0. And then the damage against rare and unique enemies is just some icing on the cake on top of that. So I tried to farm one of those up before making this video. I hope that you can get one faster than I can. For our quiver, it's the only quiver that exists. Our Drelkors, we talked about this at the very beginning. All of these stats are very relevant to us. And then I think this build is not going to be playable unless you have the bow critical strike chance, hybrid attack speed affix that I have LP'd onto this thing. The gearing process for this particular character was very smooth. I started out using a normal Dreadthorn bow. I ended up using a normal Drelkors for a while, and then eventually we upgraded into this. And the whole time, my damage felt quite good. So I was happy to like swap into Multishot around level 64 when I could start using 58 when I could start using a Dreadthorn bow because I wanted that base critical strike chance so I could be crit as soon as possible. And then once I got a Drelkors, I used that. Once I got the upgraded one with the LP, I used that. It was a nice transition, and it felt like every single upgrade felt very reasonable. For your rings, you're looking for mana regeneration. Mana regeneration crit chance, mana regeneration physical damage are both things that you're looking for there. You do want a bunch of mana regeneration. You're in the market for more than 20, if you can. On your gloves, there's not many prefixes that are worthwhile for you. Things like strength and dexterity. Dexterity and crit chance are both very good, but strength is just going to be there to help you get some extra armor on your character. It's not doing anything else in terms of damage. But let's look at our boots as well. As much life as possible, as much movement speed as possible. And for our relic, again, we have mana regeneration, crit multi, and whatever relevant suffixes you need to round out your frailties and your armor shreds. I guess you have armor shred in your mastery, but you want frailties somewhere, and it's either going to come from your amulet or it's going to come from this. Worthwhile to mention before we move on from our gearing section is that shock is a nice thing to have in any kind of stun-based build because shock increases the chance that the enemy is going to receive a stun. So if you're realistically trying to stun things, you'd like to have both a bunch of stun chance and some shock chance in your character. The last thing to mention is that because we're using a unique bow, we don't have any slow chance on this. And it is important when you're playing Multishot to have slow chance somewhere in your character so that you can make a use of this pinning shots here. So more damage against slow targets. And we happen to have our slow chance coming in from our idols here. So we only have a 17% chance to slow on bow hit, but we hit 17 times per right click. And sometimes even more than that, because remember, every once in a while, Multishot's going to repeat. So this happens very often. It's great. These two idols, you could trim one of these 4x1s in order to fit in a Throne of Ambition if you wanted a more armor multiplier to be even tankier. That'd be a good thing to consider if you really care about your single target encounters as much as possible. But fitting in both of these is nice for your damage. So remember, this 6% increased damage per arrow with Multishot is why we don't care about other increases to our damage. Things like percent increased physical damage aren't so important because this damage per arrow with Multishot is so big. So this is 6% times 17. You can do the math at home. And then we have 5% times 17 on this one here. The rest of our idols are pretty normal. We have maybe hybrid health if you're using one of those, some extra fire resistance, some extra void res, physical res, just to round out whatever resistances you need on top of those two idols. If you're doing something like this, you could also make use for a 1x3 idol, something that has damage while wielding a bow, or maybe even some percent increased health, or just, like I mentioned, the hybrid health 1x2 idols as well. All right, so we talked about skills, mastery, gear. Let's touch on blessings real quick. And I'm going to swap over to this view because this is how I like to talk about blessings. The blessings that matter most would be these three. So we have crit multi from our Black Sun. Ending the storm, you could do stun chance, or you could just do some lightning resistance. Lightning resistance, less important these days because the best body armor not only has crit avoidance on it, but it also has lightning res on it. So this Gorgon scale is a really nice addition to the game. I'm glad that it appeared in patch 0.9. For Reign of Dragons, because we have crit multi on our body armor, and because we also have access to crit avoidance in our mastery itself, I think it's important not to get crit avoidance here, and instead just get as much plus to all resistances as possible. For Spirits of Fire, I think the easy choice here is plus to armor. Plus to endurance would be fine as well, like the percent increased endurance. But realistically, I think the flat armor is much more valuable to you, especially because your shurikens give you the percent increased armor here. So the last thing that I think matters a little bit is this Age of Winter. So we have a chance to shred physical resistance if possible. Realistically, I don't think you need this. If you would like to rely on shurikens for all of your fizz shred chance instead, so these are going to hit, what, 5 times or something? 4 times, 5 times? Because you're casting 5 of them as you do this. And each of those, when you're point blank standing on top of a boss, is going to apply 2 stacks of shred, and shred only stacks up 10 times. So if you would only like to gear for single target encounters, you could drop the physical shred from this and instead opt into percent increased armor. And then you could even grab your Throne of Ambition 2x2 idol on top of that to really go gung-ho on your armor. If you want to kill things at a distance and you care about like clear speed a little bit more, then this of course is a great way of getting some extra clear speed, some extra damage onto your character. So that about does it for the blessings here. We talked about a handful of things, right? We talked about apostasy and having 2 different layers of defense and how that's nice for not only tanking something, but also just not getting hit, so you're not getting stunned by it when you're in higher content. We talked about the difference between something like a Flight of the First, which is a bow that existed back in 0.9 as well and has a bunch of bow crit on it, but now that flat crit has been reintroduced into the game in this new affix here, we can once again use something like Drelkors and scale our crit chance, or scale our flat crit, percent increased crit, and make that kind of thing work as a crit character, as a marksman. So I like that there. What are the topics here? We talked about the sacrificing some vitality here and getting some chance to gain a dust shroud when hit, and how that figures into your apostasy build. And then we even talked about some new unique items with the apostate sanctuary and the amulet slot. I think the last thing that I want to say about this before we hang it up for the night is there was a idea that I had, and I'd like to see this fleshed out. I know there's some other content creators that kind of have some ideas like this as well, but I think there's a real chance that having some kind of haste build would be very interesting. So I couldn't quite find a good one, but I want something that has both health or hybrid health or vitality and also movement speed, because the movement speed on these boots is just so low. If you could, I would be interested in using these boots along with maybe 1 or maybe 2 different Quicksilver rings to have as much chance to gain haste as possible, along with the chance to gain haste from the base rogue tree here. And gaining haste that often is a nice way of getting a little bit of an incidental ward, and that ward would also go well with, you could use an apostate sanctuary, and apostate sanctuary is a new amulet and it's sexy and it's really strong. But you know, having a whole bunch of ward is a nice way to make use of the Zathara's Conundrum amulet. So I definitely have one sitting around because I planned this ahead of time. Zathara's Conundrum is something that I used a while ago on a building a better bleed bow character, if you've seen that video on YouTube. And getting that more physical damage, this is one of the first more damage multipliers that was ever in Last Epoch. And this is going to apply not only to bleeds, but also to all of your damage from Drelkors as long as you can remain at full health. So having all of your health gain on crit and health gain on skill use is great, but having some extra ward on top of that is a nice way to make sure that this more multiplier is always active for you. So trying something like Advent of the Erased, these new Weaver's Will boots, along with some LP Quicksilver rings and a Zathara's would be an interesting thing to do. Most notable about that is like maybe you'd like to have a little bit of ward retention for that character. But thankfully, the glove slot on a marksman is not a very contested spot. So you could get just a little bit of cold res and a little bit of frostbite shackles in order to... God, do I have frostbite shackles in here? I do. I got 1 pair. You could get just a little bit of ward retention by getting maybe a 1 LP frostbite shackles, get some hybrid life on this thing, and slap that onto your character. And I think you have a pretty interesting like haste combo build, getting a little bit of ward to give yourself some better layers of defense. I'd be very interested in seeing that. I didn't end up farming the components, and I couldn't find a good pair of Advent of the Erased, but it's the kind of thing that I hope somebody else experiments with in the future. I've got a lot more builds that I want to play. I love shooting 17 arrows, and this character has been very, very enjoyable, up into and including all the tier 4 bosses and 500 corruption. But I've got other builds to play. So we're going to hold this, hang this one up for now, move on to something else. We've got a build contest coming up soon as well. But hopefully, I mean, I think about bow builds, and the fact that the other bow builds in the game are detonating arrow, where you just shoot 1 arrow at a time, and puncture, where you just shoot 1 arrow at a time. It's nice that we have something that feeds into my zoomer brain that still remembers playing Tornado Shot in Path of Exile. Just shooting a whole bunch of arrows at one time, blasting up the entire map, feels really good. So hopefully you can enjoy this as well. I'll see you next time.